Okay, here we go again. I've already done 3 takes of this video, and the first time I didn't have my microphone plugged in, and the second time I plugged my microphone in after I'd started the video without even thinking about the fact that obviously it wouldn't incorporate the microphone while it was already running. So anyway, this is what we've done today. We've incorporated recent timers into the design, which basically I wanted to have a way to show the timers that you've set in the past and have them easily accessible so that you can just tap on them and set them to the current timer that you're about to run. And this is the document that I made for that. So you can see this is the simplest idea that I came up with. It's basically just some buttons there with the recent times, and it's okay, but they're quite visually important. You can see that they're taking up a lot of the idea, and there's no indication of what they are really. It doesn't really show if they're recent times or favorite times or anything. You kind of have to figure that out yourself. So this is while it's running, just to show that obviously you can't set the timer to something else while it's already running, because that would obviously reset the timer, and you might as well just press the cancel button and set a new one. This shows an idea that I had where if you've got a compacted version of it, it'd take up less of the screen space, but I'm not sure I like that much, because you can't really see much on the screen at once. It's all kind of hidden off the sides, and especially if you had like 5 or 6 times in there, you wouldn't really see much. This one here kind of has them all just floating around, and as you have more recents, they'd pop up and you'd have more floating. But down here, I just made a mock-up of what they would look like if you had a whole lot, and it gets kind of complicated. And if you're going to limit it, then you might as well have something else like this, where you could have at least a scroll bar or something to show all of them easily. So this one's okay. This design is okay. It's really good that it has recent timers there. I like that, and I could put that on all the other ones obviously, but it doesn't fit as well with them, but it fits with this one. The only problem with this one is that the lines here in the middle kind of add a lot of element to the screen, so it kind of adds a bit too much visual interest, and also they don't necessarily look like buttons that you can click on. It's kind of looks just like a history log, and maybe people had not even realized that you can click on them, and that's kind of defeating the purpose of having them easily accessible there. Here I've got a recents button, which if you click on the button, it would show a pop-up that, or some other method of then revealing the timers that you can select. That adds 2 steps to it though. Even though it compacts the view and hides it away, it adds 2 steps and makes it harder to set a timer quickly. And I also put another button here so that this didn't look as important as the start button, because obviously the start button is a much more important button when it comes to running a timer. This recents button looked too visually high in the hierarchy, but this clear button, I'm not sure it's actually the most useful button, and I can't think of what else you'd put there, and it's kind of just a button for the sake of a button. So yeah, obviously clearing a timer is useful, but you don't need to clear it that often that it needs a whole button sitting there, and the visual distraction that it adds is more of a problem than the problem that it solves of being able to reset the timer to 0, which you could obviously just tap 3 times or slide it down a bit, if you even need to set it to 0, because most likely you'd be wanting to set it to a new time. So yeah, that one I've already looked at, and this is my favorite one here. It doesn't have many timers visible. There's only the 4 there, and perhaps I could shrink these 6 down and have 6 visible, and maybe that would be better. But what it does have is it's got this little favorite timers here, which is kind of a separate tab, and I think that's nice because it gives a reason to have recent timers as an option there, as a heading, because obviously it's a button that you can switch between, and which also then has the purpose of telling you what these random buttons are. And the favorite timers is an interesting thing as well, because you could either have it that you set the timer as your favorite timer, or it could be automatically calculated by the software as a favorite timer when you set it most often. So it'll be kind of the timers ranked by how many times you've set them, rather than ranked by which was the most recently set, excuse me. So that's a pretty neat little thing, neat little document there, and I've got some nice inspiration from it. And then came the more technical side, which is how am I going to make the display work with only one screen. So you can see there's 3 screens here, and they're the 3 states of the timer. This is when the timer is in the editing mode. This is when it's running, or it'll be the same screen if it's paused. And this is the screen when the alarm is going off, so when it's at 0 and the button down there says stop. But these aren't separate screens. In my earlier prototype, I had them as separate screens that the application changed between, but I don't actually want that, because I think that was a big part of why the code became so complicated, and I think it will work a lot better if I have it all compacted into one screen. But that could result in a big, long file. Even though I'm getting rid of extra files, it would be a very long file with a lot of stuff in it. So what I'm doing is actually breaking the screen up into 4 sections here. So the 4 sections are the header view, which is where the little settings button is, the time view, which is where the editing of the time is, or where the big display of the time ticking down, or the flashing display of the 0 when the time is finished is shown. And then there's the recents view, which is here, and it's got the recent timers as we were talking about just before. And then there's the control view, which has the buttons that start and pause and cancel and stop. And the idea behind having these separate things is that they all work autonomously within the timer. So when the main view, which is this one that has all the things in it, is about to appear, the application will check what the state of the timer is. And if the timer was in the editing state, all of these will be visible, and each of them will choose to be visible themselves. So you'll end up with all the elements displayed on the screen, and the ones that change depending on the state will change to what they need to be. So when the time view gets the news that it's in editing mode, it will show the editing controls. And when the control view gets that as well, it will show the start button rather than showing the pause, cancel, or the stop button. So the order that this happens in, and this happens whenever the application opens, whether it's being opened for the first time from the home screen, or it's being opened because you've just switched from another app to this one, or you've tapped a notification, anything. When the main view is going to appear, it'll update the state of the application. So it'll check the history of what the state was in, which gets saved every time the timer app starts to close. And if the timer was running, that's the state that it'll come up with. Although there is a little thing, and the reason that it has to update the state is because if the timer was running when it was closed, but it's been more than 5 minutes or whatever, anything longer than the amount of time that the timer was running for, then instead of going straight to the running state with these pause and cancel buttons, it should go straight to the alarm state because the time is finished. And so that's why it does this little update here. And then there'll be a little check to see what the result of updating the state was. So see if it was running, see if it was in the alarm state, see if it was in the editing state, and then all the display elements will update themselves accordingly to what they need to be, whether they need to be invisible or visible, or whether they need to show a certain element or show certain buttons. And I think that's a pretty neat way to do it, and hopefully it'll work out well in the code and make it nice and simple and easy to understand and break the things up into pretty understandable chunks. So that's what I've got done today, and I think that's pretty good amount of work. And I've got some other projects that I'm going to work on now, but that's it for that, so goodbye.